Hello, this is Kim with Standing on Solid Ground. I am your host of this motivational and inspirational podcast, and it's time for our book of the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is the 20th book of the Bible, and it is known or heard of or have been written by King Solomon. The purpose of the book of Ecclesiastes, the teacher explores the meaning of life and searches for lasting value in this life. The teacher considers wisdom, knowledge, pleasure, work, time, but comes away from the search with a cynical and unsettling view. Life is meaningless. The one that we are understood as being the speaker or the narrator of Ecclesiastes is the person called a teacher and identifies himself as the current king of Israel and the son of King David. So this is where the reckoning or findings of who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, the King Solomon, because he was the son of David. The book imparts wisdom. Like other books of wisdom in the Bible, Ecclesiastes is concerned with the imparting of wisdom and teaching all to fear the Lord. However, it also serves as a balance for the practical wisdom of the Proverbs. And we do know, if we read the book of Proverbs, Proverbs is full of wise, what they would call wise words of someone who is speaking from the heart of God. Now, the book is from a biblical canon to represent the final dance on the part of the wisdom, the conclusion of the ways of man, a logical endpoint or to unfolding of human wisdom in the Old Testament, and also advocate or go into a venture of the new. The book is a translation of Hebrew from the word kahilis, which means one who convenes as assembly or simply a preacher. The meaning of life in Ecclesiastes 9:4-6 suggests that the life as such carry marginal value over death. And 6:1-6 indicates that if life includes an abundance of unenjoyed possessions, it is better than unenjoyed possessions is more of a burden than the death, because death is considered better. And I remember when I was growing up, my mom used to always say that you are to be saddened at birth, but you are to celebrate at death. And for a long time I did not understand that until as I got older and realized that it was more of a cheerful celebration at death than it was for a birth. And you would think that that would be the other way around. But if you think about children in this day and time, and just life or people in general, they would take death over life, especially if they're suffering, if they're in agony, if they are have a chronic disease, they're constantly in pain. When you consider all of these things that life is handing out to them, they would rather take death. And a lot of times, my dad was one of them, that he would rather take death than to suffer the way that he did. And you never really understand how they feel until you are in their shoes. And until you are facing what they're facing, you'll never make that connection. The three meanings of life is coherence, of a sense of comprehensibility, and one's life making sense. Purpose means a sense of core goals, aims, and direction. Significance is about sense of life's inherent value and having life worth living. A lot of people in these days and times feel like that if you don't have the popularity, if you don't have the fame, if you don't have the fortune, if you don't have the clout that so many other people have, that they are not living, that this is not life to them, and I see it in YouTube, I see it in Facebook. Now, I'm not on Instagram and I'm not on TikTok and different things like that, because that's really going out there. And I know they have some really good information, but it can also be very time consuming. It can take away from what you really are supposed to be doing. From you take away from your family, you take away from your life, you take away from yourself, because you are absorbed in other people's lives. And many people like to be center of attention. They like to have that sense of people watching them or following you all over the place, following what you're doing. And money has become that root. It's like, okay, if I can pull them with money, I got them. And really, I always look at the tapeworm as money. Money is that tapeworm. It is that bait that pulls you in. It used to be looks. It used to be brains. It used to be a good conversation, or just being able just to go out and have fun, just enjoying the person that is before you. But when money came into play, they feel like that the more gold you have, the bigger the house you have, the more fancier car you have. This is what we have to have in order to draw people close to us. But no one has ever really stopped to think about what kind of individuals we're drawing to us. And this is how we set ourselves up to getting hurt. And so this book, Ecclesiastes, is showing us that sometimes we think that this is the best life ever when we have all of this and when we have all of that. But when the lights go out, when the door is shut and locked, and when you're setting up in your room by yourself, was it the best life ever? Or was it just a facade, something to fill in the blank? You really need to, sit back and ask yourself that question. The motto of Ecclesiastes is the primary motto of Ecclesiastes is everything is futile. Ecclesiastes shows us that because we or our works are futile, that is, destined to perish, we must not waste our lives trying to justify our existence with pursuits that ultimately means nothing. Bible also makes it very clear that we shouldn't store up our treasures here on earth. That we should not store our treasures up here. That we should store our treasures up on high, where it doesn't get stolen, whether it doesn't get old or tarnish or rust or become corruptible. A lot of people would look at it as money is not corruptible. You might want to take a look at that. It might not be corruptible in a way of you going out and being able to buy yourself things or being able to do this or do that. I've seen people with money not pay their bills. I've seen people with money that had the life. They had everything. but lost everything because they didn't pay a bill. They didn't take care of business like they should. Now, I do understand that a lot of them had accountants, investors that have stolen money from them. I do understand that. But at the same time, we all have to be responsible for our own lives. We really do. I don't care how big or how small we are. We have to be responsible. And everything that we gain in this life, once we leave it for somebody else to deal with. And that's not fair. That's not fair. It should be as simplified as possible because you can't take it with you. It's nothing wrong with living life to the fullest, but as long as God is number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then after that, everything else is taken care of, then you have a sound ground that you know that if I leave this behind, my family is taken care of because it's not going with me. You'll be able to separate yourself. There are many people that are living as though they'll never die. And that's dangerous. That nothing will ever happen to them. That they will live forever. And that is a misconception. Now, the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes guides us to the real truth behind all things, putting our fear, love, and trust in God alone. Solomon's wisdom teaches us that life is long and difficult, and that much of our time is spent on vanity. And if you recall, vanity, vanity, vanity. He mentions that a lot because he learned after he did what he did to disobey God. He disobeyed God. And he brought in familiar spirits that were unfamiliar to God. You know, he said not to be, interacting with women with these spirits of idolatry, of idol gods, and different things of this nature. The process, if we really think about it, the process of women falling at your feet because you got money happened way back in the day. This just didn't all of a sudden start. This has been happening for quite some time. That women would come in and they will flaunt themselves around and, gesture certain things. And of course, Solomon is, technically, if we looked at, was a womanizer. He was a womanizer. So was his father, David. David wanted another man's wife and took her as his own after he set her husband up on the front line to get killed. That was terrible. He had already committed lust in his heart. He had committed lust in his heart before God had it written in the New Testament. That if you commit lust in your heart, you have already committed adultery. You don't even have to touch the person. You've already had it in your spirit or in your well-being. So this is not a good thing. This is very sad to think about. And so when we think about vanity, when we are so caught up in what we look like, making sure our lipstick is not on our teeth, make sure that our eyeshadow is put on right, our eyeliner. I don't wear makeup. My mother taught me a long time ago, don't even wear makeup. I don't want you wearing makeup, and I never did, really. The best I do is chapstick or lip gloss. That's the best I do. I might do eyeliner every now and again. But for the most part, makeup was just not in my structure. It wasn't meant for me to wear. And as life goes on, I appreciate my mom for that. I mean, she made my face up for prom and for my graduation, but that's the extent of it. I really didn't have my face made up for anything. And she wanted me to see the real Kim. She did not want me to see a mask because she felt like that makeup was a mask. It was covering up the true person. And she didn't want me to be vain about myself. She didn't want me to think of myself more. I mean, and my mom and dad, they drilled that in our being when we were growing up. But now that I'm reading about the book of Ecclesiastes, I understand why. I understand and get a better understanding of where their purpose was coming from. Rear up a child, and my mother always said rear up. She didn't say train up. Even though the Bible said train up, she says rear up a child in the way that they make up. And I never was raised wearing makeup. And I still to this day, I do not. They trained us up to follow Christ. And to this day, that's what I'm doing. I strayed away a little bit. I did my own little thing, but it amount to enough, but it didn't amount to enough where God had 15, 20 pages of bad things that I've done. It might have built up a little stack, but not that many pages. And so we need to really look at who we are in the mirror, because God doesn't like vanity. He doesn't like for us to think of more of ourselves than we are. Now, the most appropriate they call for a funeral, which they do take out of the book of Ecclesiastes. The passage from this book, a part of the Hebrew Bible, make for appropriate readings. The most famous passage is 3:1-8, where he's saying, to everything there is a season and a time for everything under the sun. So this was something that is used, and I've heard it even in today's time. I've been to Mississippi, where a funeral has been done, and I've been to Chicago, where a funeral has been done, and also Pennsylvania, where a funeral. And I do recall hearing this actually being spoken at a funeral. So it makes sense. The book of Ecclesiastes, as I've stated, is a book of wisdom, along with the book of Proverbs. And it would make sense because God used King Solomon, as this writer of this book, from what we understand. I have to make sure it's concrete, but from what I understand, that's who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, the King Solomon. And it was referred to as short sayings. These were proverbs that were just spoken, almost like cliches that they put out even in today's time. Well, it's the same with the book of Ecclesiastes. They're short sayings, but they have a very, very profound meaning. And so when we go through this book and we read it, we like to read it with a greater understanding of what the purpose was for this book. And in this case, it was about life. For us to understand that life is not promised to us. Death is more promised to us than life, because, even in the Bible, it said it's important for every man once to die. So death is unavoidable, but the Bible never promised us life. And we have to take time out to look at our life to make sure that we are in front of God, that we are in front of his throne and in his presence, that when life ends for us here, we can have eternal life with God. The book of Ecclesiastes. This is Kim with Standing on Solid Ground. You have yourself a wonderful and blessed day.